What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and in this video, I am showcasing one of my absolute favorite builds of this season. Now, I have long been a Solar Titan enjoyer, going back to year 1 with Hollowfire Heart on Bottom Tree Sunbreaker for sunspots. Thermite grenades were my native choice back then, and I just love the playstyle. I then made an Ashen Wake build on Middle Tree that had unlimited grenades thanks to Elemental Wells. And I also abused Syntheseps with the Bonk Titan and 1-2 Punch before it was patched. And when Solar 3.0 was released, I mained Syntho Titan for a year and a half and still rock that playstyle to this day despite the recent nerfs. But with the pyrogale gauntlets coming out last season and the recent nerf to Synthos not making them a de facto must-use exotic, I decided to build around some consecration melees. And holy hell does this build slap. I took it into the birthplace of the Vile GM solo, and well, you can see for yourself from the background footage how strong it is. Sadly, I did die on the boss's final phase. I missed one shot on the immunity totem, and that was all she wrote. Regardless, I have played enough with this build to be able to confidently say that it can hold up in the hardest activities in the game. I took it through a Master Loss sector with ease, and if you run this in a GM and a fire team, you will be obliterating everything in sight. So before we dive into the specifics of the build, I do want to preface it with a disclaimer. This build requires aggression. It is extremely effective when used properly, but you need knowledge of how to play aggressive and high-end content, otherwise you will just die. This means knowing spawn points and how to use cover to strike when the time is right is vitally important. But in the right hands, you can decimate entire rooms of adds in one big melee slam. It's an extremely satisfying playstyle. So enough talk about how great the build is, let's look at what the build actually consists of. It obviously centers around the exotic Pyrogale gauntlets. These have the exotic trait Percussive Flames, modifies Burning Maul into a single high damage slam of your hammer that creates several cyclones of flame. Consecration's second slam creates a cyclone of flame. So it's a pretty simple exotic really. Your consecration melee has a cyclone and your super is a one-shot super that deals a shitload of damage. Seriously, the super is great and it can one-shot champions even in Grandmasters. It's also great in dungeons and raids for a one-off super for boss damage. And one thing to note with the super though is you want to cast it right on top of the target. If you hit them from far away, you deal way less damage because it will extend out in a triangular wave. So something to keep in mind. Also, apparently you should stay away from the tops of stairs. I don't know what happened there, but it was very unfortunate. Just Destiny things. I love the physics in this game sometimes. So naturally, we run the Burning Maul super, and we run the Bonk Hammer, which can still be used to bonk enemies. And then for our first aspect, we obviously run Consecration. This modifies our slam into a big slam that can decimate adds, and this is especially good for killing groups of enemies as they spawn in, which is great in things like the Moon Battleground or Birthplace of the Vile GM. It also applies Scorch and can cause ignitions, so you can use it on unstoppable champions. Again though, you just have to do so carefully, but it's very effective when done right. Next, you would think Roaring Flames would be the way to go as you get more damage from your slam, but I have tinkered with it a lot and that is not the play here. At least not in high-end content. Soul Invictive is just too good to pass on, and Roaring Flames will run out by the time you get to use another slam in most cases. So my pick is Soul Invictus. Ability Final Blows will create a sunspot for us, and this gives us a myriad of benefits, the biggest being an increase of 100% to our melee and grenade energy. For real, with this build setup, you can have near unlimited slam melees if you are playing the build right. Defeating scorched targets also creates a sunspot, which is super easy to do this season thanks to Kindling Trigger. I like to pair this build with Sunshot as it hits like a truck. But really, any solar primary is good here as they can all apply Scorch thanks to Kindling Trigger. So this is just another way for us to make sunspots. The sunspots also deal damage to enemies inside of them, and you can use it to make your super last longer. Like I can cap an entire plate in the Birthplace GM just standing in my sunspot with my super. It lasts a really long time. And lastly, the sunspot gives us 5 seconds of restoration, which is huge for survivability in endgame. You get a big slam off and make a sunspot, and then you can get out alive if there are still enemies around thanks to restoration. It helps big time. For the fragments, I went a number of different ways here and tried many things out. You can run what you like obviously, but here's what I landed on for soloing the Birthplace GM. But then I will talk about some substitutions as well. The most important fragment that you must run is Ember of Searing. This gives us melee energy for defeating scorched combatants, and we'll be doing a lot of that. This allows us to pretty much always have a melee as long as we are using it smartly to take out groups of adds. It also spawns a fire sprite which reduces our grenade cooldown. In low-end content, run the grenade of your choice, but in high-end content, I definitely suggest healing grenades. Next, you want Ember of Ashes for applying more Scorch to targets. This helps our super and our Consecration melee. So the next two you can play around with. Initially, I wanted to use Ember of Char and Ember of Eruption for bigger booms, but that really isn't necessary. The consecration melee will take out all the adds regardless of ignitions, even in Grandmaster content. So I ended up with the old tried and true combo of Ember of Torches to get Radiant from melee hits, and Ember of Empyrean to extend Radiant and Restoration with Solar Final Blows. And this was definitely the play. You can throw a healing grenade at your feet and then slam a group of adds and you have 12 seconds of Radiant and Restoration easily. Torches was also great as the Bonk Hammer could apply a 15% weaken from Revitalizing Blast on the artifact and proc 25% bonus to our weapon damage, and this allowed me to outright kill an Unstoppable in 2 rockets. Granted, I had Solo Operative active as well, but still, that's a nasty combination. If you were in a team setting though, you could run Argent Ordnance for even more rocket damage. And the extension to Resto really helps you to survive sticky situations, so I can't recommend those 2 fragments enough. You can also get Resto from your Sunspot and then extend it with kills from Sunshot. But if you can't pass through the Sunspot safely, then you can just use your healing grenade. So that is the essence of the build. You just seek out groups of enemies and take them out with ease with your consecration melee. You obviously want 100 strength for this build and 100 resilience for survivability. And then I recommend as high of discipline as you can get after that. Torches and Empyrean sadly give -10 to discipline and resilience, so that was one nice thing about the other fragment setup that I had awesome stats. But the fewer total stats are well worth it for these fragments. Between 100 strength, Ember of Searing, and Soul Invictus, you will have near constant melees. But to help us out even more, we can use mods to further increase our ability uptime. On the helmet, we have Hands On for more super energy on melee kills. This is a no-brainer really. Then we have Heavy Ammo Finder and Harmonic Siphon. On the gloves, Impact Induction for grenade energy back when we deal damage, and Heavy Handed to make an Orb of Power when we get a melee kill. Melee Kickstart could be great here as well, but I didn't have mod cost room. I went with Harmonic Loader instead because reloading sucks and Sunshot has to reload quite a bit. On the chest, just whatever resist mods you want to choose. On the legs, Invigoration and Innervation for grenade and melee energy back on Orb Pickup. These are great, but for some reason they won't allow you to pick up an orb if you have a full super. At least it wasn't for me in my runs. This was super annoying as oftentimes I needed grenade energy but I couldn't pick up my orb. But when I didn't have full super, I was able to grab the orbs and I would get the ability energy. So hopefully this gets fixed. Then on the class item, Bomber and Outreach for grenade and melee when you cast your barricade, and I had distribution as well, but that is only because of the strike that I was running. You couldn't get finishers at all in the boss room, but in normal play, run 1-2 finisher here. Like if you were running the coil, it'd be very easy to get finishers at will. So here's how the gameplay loop works in lower end content. You get a melee kill with your Consecration Slam, which makes an orb from Heavy Handed. You pick up the orb and you get some grenade and melee energy from your leg mods. Plus you pass through a Sunspot for even more ability return. And now you have Armor Charge. Find and finish an ad, and this will proc 1-2 finisher and restore the rest of your melee. Rinse, repeat. With this gameplay loop, you'll pretty much have constant melee uptime. So one thing I need to mention is that Revitalizing Blast doesn't proc from the Consecration melee for whatever reason. Here's proof in the background footage. It works for the Bonk Hammer, but not the big melee. I'm not sure if this is intended, because it uses your melee charge, so to me it should be considered a solar ability. I've made a post about this on the Bungie help forums, so if you're still watching, please take a minute to do so maybe Bungie can fix this. However, your super does proc Revitalizing Blast, so that makes it even stronger this season, and it's already wonderful. I took this build into the Moon Battleground, and I was using a Blinding GL and the Heart Shadow Sword to get around the map so I could get slams off, and it worked quite well. So there's a little pro tip for you. But you can pretty much run whatever weapons you want with this build, but a solar weapon is great for proccing Sunspots and Ember of Searing. Use all the solar artifact mods like Kindling Trigger, Flint Striker, and Rays of Precision. And in the footage, I also had From Whence You Came for even more ability damage to Scorn. The Monte Carlo exotic auto rifle would help in those rare times where you don't have a melee ability, so that is a good pairing here. Or you could use a legendary weapon with the perk Pugilist for melee energy back on kills. I seriously can't recommend this build enough, and I hope the background footage showcased how great it is. I've taken it through half the GMs this season and it has performed great. Again, it is a little risky of a playstyle, but you will learn when to pick and choose your opportunities. Also, don't slam Curse Thrall or Screebs, you will die. And that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, then a like and sub would be greatly appreciated. I can't express how nice it has been to finally have a good reason to take off my beloved Syntheseps on my Solar Titan this season. This is such a fun, effective, and engaging playstyle, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I do. Anyways, happy ground pounding and take care.